Hello everybody, this is Jay Nowak, one of many co-founders of Kaiju Force Neo Limited, and if you probably haven't already noticed, you might know me well for being a primary voiceover and the official creator of a series called T-Rex. This of course has been a somewhat long-running series that I've had for several months now, that of which has been around for a while and has also gotten a lot of attention here. So I feel like the only true thing that I can do here at this very moment is give out a little bonus for everybody. I'm going to be taking a bit of a look at another unique piece of history behind railroading. As you can see around here, we're in Granville, Wisconsin. Now, what Granville serves as of today is the Wisconsin and Southern, a rail line that has been around since 1980. This company has been taking over a lot of unique railroads, many of which have had some forgotten history relating to most things railroad related. And so, what better way to talk about something in particular than the Menomonee Falls and Western. This was an old railroad first inaugurated in 1890, which is well over 135 years now. And so, considering how old that was, it's fair to say a lot of that old history is still around today. But what most people don't really know is that it holds a lot of history in life, just as many other things do. And today, we're going to talk a bit about the Menomonee Falls and Western before the year 2025 comes to an end. So, let's spend our happy New Year's Eve by going around the state of Wisconsin and touring from Granville all the way out to North Lake, Wisconsin.
There is no better place to get started than to go all the way back to the beginning. As you might be familiar, the Milwaukee Road was put together as one of the largest railroads ever associated with the state of Wisconsin. The Milwaukee Road itself was first founded in 1847 in Chicago, Illinois, despite the fact that the name itself mainly centers around the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And as we know, Milwaukee, Wisconsin stands a few miles southeast from Menomonee Falls, my own township. Many other towns that would incorporate a certain line that the Milwaukee Road would actually start building by this point in the 1890s would be established. This railroad in particular was known as the Milwaukee, Menomonee Falls and Western Railroad, or MMFW for short. It was first put together in the 1880s, with most of the track going through the likes of Milwaukee, Granville, Menomonee Falls, and other associated locations. A good majority of the tracks themselves would form a so-called bug-like pattern to them. This is what led to the famous nickname known as the Bugline to be recognized. And while nowadays there's very little existence of the train as well as the tracks themselves, the railroad still does leave behind a bit of history, but in a whole new way.
So, now that we're in Granville, I'd be happy to talk a bit about the new Wisconsin and Southern fork, in which that allows for railroads to switch from the likes of the Milwaukee Road, the Chicago Northwestern. Right up here is actually a switch in which that the WSOR operates, and you can even see on the flag up there, it basically says a total of 98.13 miles on this particular subdivision. But, of course, if you hadn't known by now, the Milwaukee Road and the Chicago Northwestern, it's left to right on the tracks. But, importantly, this is actually the starting point that we have here for the Menomonee Falls and Western Lake. Now, heading further down this particular part of the line is actually where the Milwaukee portion of the railroad originates from. But we don't really need to go down that far. And not to mention, these tracks have actually been here since day one, many of which have been replaced, most likely because of various maintenance works, especially the replacement of the rail, the switch blocks, and the ties and ballast, of course, all of which are critical components necessary to allow for proper working railroads in the nation. By the way, if you can see right there, across the street, we have a place called the Trackside Inn, most likely paying tribute to a lot of old railroading heritage that has once existed along this line. And now I've gone a little further down the line here where it does say begin WSOR. Interestingly enough, considering the fact that these tracks are mainly owned and operated by the likes of the Wisconsin and Southern, but you can also see in the distance there, that right there is pretty much the interlocking in which that the Chicago Northwestern and the Milwaukee Road are both known to operate. It's also around this very point in which that the Cranville Station was set up for means of the Menomonee Falls and Western. And so, while there's not much evidence of it today, it's sure to say that this was around the starting point of which that the Milwaukee, Menomonee Falls and Western was truly established. And well, here we are at the portion of Menomonee Falls in which that County Line Road, as you can see right here. This is essentially the borderline between the two counties of Waukesha County and Washington County, basically where Menomonee Falls and Germantown, Wisconsin all pretty much come together. But more importantly, we have ourselves two tracks, which interestingly enough, they both go to the counties of Menomonee Falls and Germantown and Waukesha and Washington respectively. So basically what we have here is the Chicago and Northwestern portion that basically outlies on the more eastern side of the tracks. And while we can't see the other side of it, I'll just go ahead and pull up the other view real quick. And over here we have the westernmost portion of tracks, which of course are meant for the Milwaukee Road, but as of today, they were part of the Wisconsin and Southern. Now, one thing about this is that this is not exactly a turnoff for where the Menomonee Falls and Western takes place. It's probably all the way back down towards the Granville area, in which that it's supposed that Main Street was pretty much where the true route of the Menomonee Falls and Western takes place and where it starts, pretty much. So while Milwaukee, Menomonee Falls and Western pretty much starts off in Granville, cuts off from this portion of Milwaukee Road trackage, it's still a good thing to keep in mind here that these two tracks were both part of Milwaukee Road and Chicago and Northwestern respectively, but unfortunately the Chicago Northwestern portion hasn't really seen much activity as of late. It's mostly this exact line that's former Milwaukee Road territory. So, we're now further into Menomonee Falls, by which we're right here at this four-way intersection between the likes of Pilgrim Road, which runs north and south, and we have Meagle Road, which runs basically perpendicular to the likes of Pilgrim Road. But one thing that's important to note in this instance is that I do remember seeing tracks that actually intersected through this very line right here, and more importantly, it used to exist to my own memory, but obviously you can see that they have since been torn up and has now been replaced with the likes of, well, fresh grass underneath all the snow. But the tracks, of course, did come through from this portion of the intersection down basically towards the west and would head off of this trail off towards what is now known as Interstate Route 41. And so that's something interesting that I wanted to point out here. And it's a good memory that I actually had over the years, because I, of course, have been interested in trains for a long, long time. And being that the line itself is now gone, this portion of track that has been torn up and replaced with pavement and all that, I figured that it was an interesting thing to point out here, because further down the road, which is basically going to lead us towards the likes of Parkway, is where it really starts to build up on the interest factor, because after all, it was not only Milwaukee Road track, but Menomonee Falls and Western route would basically start its true point by going down towards Grand Avenue, which I'll cut to at the moment. Now, this is the point in the journey in which that's also very similar to most of the others that I've mentioned already, but what we have here is essentially a portion of the likes of two streets that come together to Grand Avenue. Now, the Milwaukee Road, where the Menomonee Falls and Western basically starts off on its own particular right-of-way, would come down south, come around this bridge, and turn out towards Grand Avenue. It basically would come in a left turn from the likes of this road, Parkway, and then it would come south towards Grand Avenue, which currently sits today for road traffic. And then, of course, it would actually lead off towards what we have nowadays is, believe it or not, probably the most important component of all of the history of the Menomonee Falls and Western Railroad. If you hadn't already guessed, well, this is it right here. This is actually the biggest keystone of the entirety of the Menomonee Falls and Western. This is simply known as the Bugline Recreation Trail because, as stated before, the Menomonee Falls and Western rail line, this particular right-of-way, is actually dubbed the Bugline because of the unique pattern that it goes down this particular road. Obviously nowadays it is mostly pavement, with the exception of a few parts including this bridge. But it's still pretty interesting either way in order to see something like this well preserved. Because not only are we talking about the likes of old railroad history here, but the likes of recreation overall, having been here since the 1980s. Now, the trail itself, from what I understand, has been around since the 1980s and has basically served a lot of joggers, runners, dog walkers, bicyclists, and plenty of kids and adults alike, as well as senior citizens. Considering that the very starting point is actually right near a retirement center, as you can see near this river. Not just any river, of course, it's the Menomonee River, which of course is one of the biggest that we have around this whole portion of the state. But it's more importantly how Menomonee Falls got its name because of the large waterfall that's in the area as well, and has been around for a pretty long time, even more so than the railroads itself. So, while I will say that I won't explore the entirety of the trail here, I will at least say that I'm at my second stop, if you will, because earlier I was at the entrance point of the Bugline Trail, but now, as you can see right here, we're basically at what we consider to be, I'd say, a solid distance here, because we pretty much crossed through the entirety of Menomonee Falls by this point. So I, again, did not go through here on foot. I instead just traveled through here. This is the Menomonee Avenue leg of the route, in which that it goes a lot further down this direction here. Obviously going across the street here, in which that we have ourselves a trail going even further, like so. Yeah, it just goes a lot further straight before it eventually turns to the right. This is, of course, because of the fact that it eventually goes off into Lannon, which is an outskirt of Sussex. And one thing about the Lannon portion of this trail is pretty interesting to talk about, so I'll get back to you guys in a bit. This point right here is probably what I consider to be one of the most interesting aspects about the Menomonee Falls and Western's Bugline system, basically. The Bugline Trail, as we know, started all the way back in Menomonee Falls, and then we went through the likes of Lannon, sidelining Main Street, and now we're basically right here in a portion of Sussex, just beyond Lannon, that actually goes through this bridge right here. You can see it's a nice big wooden bridge that goes from there all the way down to over there. It's well over 100 feet long end to end. But what makes it really interesting is this. This is the Waukesha subdivision, and I've been talking about this exact rail line for years now, and I especially am a fan of it because, well, it's Canadian National for you. But remember, back in the days of the Milwaukee Road, as well as the Soo Line, well, this was operated by Milwaukee Road under the Menomonee Falls and Western, and that down there would have been owned by the Soo Line long before the Wisconsin Central and Canadian National took place. And I'm sure that there is a CN train coming down at some point. Man, just look at what we got down here. I mean, you can imagine a Soo Line freight train happening over here behind me on this lower level, and then basically back in the day at the Milwaukee Road, a train would be coming over here and going across this bridge. So obviously it's got a little bit of ice on it, but still, it's just incredible to know that we at least have one portion of the likes of railroading modernized out here, while a small bit of what was going on over there is all that exists, because it's just nothing but trail. But like I said, you can imagine way back then when railroading on the Menomonee Falls and Western was commonplace. Another thing that's interesting about the Menomonee Falls and Western trail that we have, which is still right here beside me, is the fact that there is, believe it or not, the Adams subdivision right behind me. Yeah, no joke. This was an old Chicago Northwestern line, first put together in the 1910s. The tracks themselves have been around for over a century by now, and this bridge that stays above the road here, as well as the trail, which again once used to be a rail line itself, this really does bring me back to what I was talking about earlier with the Waukesha subdivision, which, by the way, is over there. So think of it this way. This means that at one point in life, there was the Chicago Northwestern, Milwaukee Road, and the Soo Line all together right here in Sussex. So if that doesn't blow your mind, then just wait until you see what I've got further down the road. Right up here is, believe it or not, another big landmark that solidifies the history of the Menomonee Falls and Western. Here we have ourselves a children's playground known as Madeline Park, along with, get this, one actual station, other than what we saw earlier with the likes of the Granville station, and pretty soon we'll get to show even more of that sort of stuff. But the thing is, the playground itself is modeled after an actual train, most likely one from the early 1900s, as ones of that type were quite common on the Menomonee Falls and Western. And as for the trail itself, it of course did lead to this exact depot, and this is around the same location that it once stood. But of course, it's nowadays just a simple place for people to walk into, especially on a rainy day. As for the trail itself, well, it goes a little further down the road there, and it eventually will go further out west towards the remainder of Sussex, and eventually on to more towns, which we'll look at a little later here. It's still, up until this very point, it's already been a pretty eventful thing that's been going on. So I'm more than happy about how much history is still well retained after 40 years or so. So we'll just go on ahead and skip to the next destination. Okay, so it's now around 8 a.m. on Christmas Day, wouldn't you know? And this is our next stop that we have here along our journey of basically chartering through the likes of the Menomonee Falls and Western. Now, the rail line, as you can see, it's pretty wide in comparison to how the original tracks were put down. And that's because there was a good amount of ballast and dirt around the tracks. So essentially, when they were creating the trail, they were creating a lot of headroom here, about 8 feet in width, as one important detail to note. But in case it wasn't already made clear, this is the town of Merton. This, of course, was another artery that allowed for the Menomonee Falls and Western to interlink between cargo and passenger work. But more importantly, look at all this brushland out here. I mean, towards the end of December, this is more often than not the case, as to expect. Of course, there is a good amount of things around here as of today, meaning times have changed, and so we can definitely expect that a lot of history out here might be more often forgotten rather than remembered. But knowing the Bugline and its long-earned reputation, it's fair to say we're definitely going to have history like this for years to come. And of course, we have ourselves another one of the signs letting us know about which is permitted and which is not, which of course is bicycles and hikers, but no horseback riding or snowmobiles are allowed, obviously. And of course, the Waukesha County Park System, which has been around since the early 80s, was primarily responsible for organizing this whole thing as a whole. So even after 42 years since they first opened this trail, we still have a lot to learn here. One other thing worth noting here is that we do have ourselves a gap. Out here in Merton, it's a pretty big one too, because as you can see around here, there's a lot of space in which that there's property ownership going on, especially with the Essential Industries Incorporated, as well as over there in the distance, you can see the Watchtel Tree Science facility. And then of course you have yourself the J.H. Wheeler Jr. Playground, all of which essentially are pretty much just a big cutoff. Right over there was basically where I had originated from previously. The trail essentially ends out here in the Merton leg of the journey, but at the same time though, we do have ourselves a few other trails similar in a way to the Bugline itself. Now, the Bugline actually does continue right around there, which is a bit of a distance from the likes of where it previously stated. So I would assume that maybe there was an S-curve around here somewhere, or maybe they just had it rerouted a little further from here to make room for this playground and all these other businesses. So this is one thing to keep in mind here, because even today we can expect playgrounds and buildings and all sorts to cut off certain scenic routes and trails, allowing them to either relocate or essentially cut off certain segments, basically leaving it an incomplete trail. But that's not to say that because of what we got over here, we do have ourselves our final destination to travel to. And so, well, here it is. This is the final leg of the journey right here. Pretty much the ending of the trail. No, I can't really park out here, so I'm gonna have to find a better spot to go. And well, I hope this will make for a good parking spot. But anyways, though, right over there is the final leg of the trail that, at least from what we know of, goes to show that Menomonee Falls and Western had come a long way since the very beginning. And well, this is what we got right here. Pretty riddled with ice, as again, it's the last week of December 2025, at the time of recording this at least. So yeah, you can see all the way down there. It's got to be at least a clear mile or so worth of trail. But really, it's just impressive. They took it as far as they could, preserving as much of this old history as possible. And wouldn't you believe? More UP Adams subdivision stuff. I mean, it does make sense, considering the fact that the Adams subdivision was actually pretty well connected to the likes of Menomonee Falls and Western. I mean, remember back near Madeline Park, a bridge went above the line, as well as the roads nearby, but out here, we have a similar sort of thing taking place. But better still, we got to understand the reality of things around here because, like I said before, this was a rail line that had originally been around at the time for more than 88 years until decline started to come around, like most short lines at the time in the late 70s. And well, even this was not immune to whatever changing times came into play. Whether it be because of the manufacturing of automobiles becoming more cheaper to own and operate, and also because of how trucking apparently proved to be a little more handy compared to railroading. Whichever way you look at it, this is just one unique piece of proof that you need to determine the fact at hand as to how history has shown change can bring about a great toll on some of the finest known pieces of United States history. And well, it came to be that in the year 1978, like many other railroads, as well as subdivisions and whatnot, this line would pretty much be abandoned and track would start being torn up by the end of the decade. But of course, we can just say, in the early 80s, the Menomonee Falls Historical Society and surrounding areas were able to come up with a unique idea to at least preserve the history of the Menomonee Falls and Western and reshape the legacy into something more modern, yet fun for people of all ages. One thing I hadn't already addressed yet was something called the Marshall Plan. This was something put together after World War II came to an end in 1945, which would help benefit a lot of communities that at first hadn't exactly experienced much of an economic threshold during the war. And so the Menomonee Falls and Western was actually among many different subdivisions, routes, short lines, etc., that the railroad would use to their advantage in helping to reshape communities that originally had taken a beating during World War II, especially with the Allied forces having to work a lot and sacrifice a lot. So, this brings us to our final stop here. Our final leg of the journey, of which that is simply known as the Old Falls Village, which has been around for a pretty long time just as well. It preserves a lot of old history of which that was only possible because of what they accomplished back in the day. As you can see here, we have ourselves Chicago Northwestern caboose number 10869, which was built in 1953 for the C&W and has been in this part of Menomonee Falls since 2020. Heading inside does of course allow for easy access for a number of different historical related information inside, like many other railroad museums that you might find across the country. And this right here is the old Menomonee Falls Station. And of course has been around in this part for many years as well. I can't exactly be sure of exactly when most of the stuff was moved here, but it's most likely around the 1980s that the station has been around here, as well as various other segments of old Menomonee Falls history has been around as well. And you can even see on the barn there, an old mural has been put up, and I do remember that being there for some time. And it's highly likely that the engine depicted on the art has some connection to either Menomonee Falls and Western, or possibly even the Milwaukee Road, which of course is seen as a predecessor and a parent company of the Menomonee Falls and Western. But still, getting to have all of this local history around here is still a unique idea, and a great way to end things off around here. So, while it's a shame that the railroading in Menomonee Falls no longer exists, nor a good amount of it in the state of Wisconsin and surrounding areas in the Midwest, we at least do have a lot to work with here. Not only with this caboose being used as a piece of CNW history in the state, but also with a portion of tracks, an old crossing, a station, and many other things being brought on as great reminders of what the nation used to be like commerce-wise. It was once a time when railroading was a big, big deal when it came to moving goods, passengers, etc. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this piece here. I traveled long and far from the likes of Granville, Menomonee Falls, as well as Lannon, Sussex, and plenty of other locations. I've gone far out to the likes of North Lake, as well as many other places. So, this is pretty much it. The end of an era for railroading, but still a lot of legacy worth keeping around for many years to come.
Now, I feel like that covers everything. But as we already know, this is still the beginning of a whole new episodic series of T-Rex. While I'm going to be taking a break for a little while, I want to wish you guys a happy new year for 2026, and may there be many, many more things to come in T-Rex. Because of such a massive success that we've had in this whole series so far, I am especially grateful to every one of you whom have come by and had support on this channel. We've gotten over 100,000 subscribers mainly because of this series. And may the best go out in the hopes that we can go even further as of tomorrow.